Check.
Good evening. My name is Leonard Levy, and I'm a trustee and poet laureate of the Explorers Club. I'm also chairman of AIAC, which is a diversified manufacturing group with operations on 5 continents. I welcome you to what promises to be among the most consequential evenings held in recent memory in this cherished club. The program is entitled Into the Heart of the Doomsday Glacier. By a show of hands, how many of you have been at the Explorers Club before? And how many are here for the first time? Okay, very good. The Explorers Club is a 122-year-old professional society dedicated to promoting scientific and sea, air, and space exploration. Our distinguished members were the first to go to the North Pole, the South Pole, Mount Everest, the Mariana Trench, and to walk on the moon. Our members have included such noted explorers as Ernest Shackleton, Theodore Roosevelt, Amelia Earhart, Sir Edmund Hillary, Thor Heyerdahl, John Glenn, and Jane Goodall. Jeff Bezos is our honorary chairman, and Buzz Aldrin is our honorary president. Our clubhouse is a museum and a monument to exploration. I hope that you've met during the reception with the members of the Seabed Curtain Project team and have inspected our 3D model out in the foyer. As I gaze over this auspicious audience today, I am stunned by the glittering array of financial, scientific, and geopolitical thought leaders in this room, all assembled here at once. I'm reminded of a similar circumstance on April 29, 1962, at the White House, honoring 49 Nobel Prize winners from the Western Hemisphere. President John F. Kennedy famously stated, "I think this is the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge that has ever been gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone." This evening was sold out weeks ago. We have well wishes from VIPs around the world, including David Petraeus, Jane Fraser, the CEO of Citibank, Sharon Bowen, the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, and Sylvia Earle, the beloved founder of Mission Blue and a member of this club. Many of you were here at the club for the kickoff of Climate Week last September, learning about the challenges of global sea level rise caused by melting glaciers in the Arctic and the Antarctica. And even more importantly, learning that there may be a way to slow it down. For me, that evening was riveting. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I approached Marianne Hagan, and I learned more and more about the Sea Curtain Project and its mission. This is a serious and profoundly important project, and the group behind it is highly qualified and driven. My friend and fellow trustee of the Explorers Club, Frederick Paulson, is also an enthusiastic supporter of the Seabed Curtain Project. Frederick Paulson is that rare individual who is equally at home in the boardrooms as well as at the bottom of the ocean. As chairman of Ferring Pharmaceuticals, Frederick transformed what was a small family business into a global pharmaceutical empire with thousands of employees in 60 countries. Frederick was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 2020 for his achievements as an explorer, scientist, and philanthropist. Frederick regrets the fact that he is not here with us today, but has sent this video greeting.
Good evening, fellow explorers, members, distinguished guests, and friends. As a trustee, I'm pleased to welcome you to the Explorers Club this evening on Friday, 13th of March. The date is appropriate for tonight's subject, Into the Heart of the Doomsday Glacier. We have the privilege to gather in a place dedicated to advancing knowledge, supporting scientific endeavor, and fostering the spirit of exploration that has defined this cherished institution for generations. Tonight, we have the honor of hearing from Professor David Holland. His recent work at the Thwaites Glacier brings us closer to understanding one of the most critical and least accessible regions of our planet. This research reminds us that exploration is not merely an act of reaching remote places. It's a commitment to understanding the forces shaping our shared future. The rapid changes unfolding in Antarctica underscore the truth that we can no longer ignore. The challenges before us demand both scientific rigor and imaginative thinking. Observation alone is not longer enough. We must be prepared to explore bold, responsible interventions that match the scale of the risk we face. And one such initiative is the Seabed Curtain Project, which examines whether redirecting warm ocean currents could help stabilize vulnerable ice systems. The project is an illustration of the kind of innovative, science-driven ideas that may one day contribute to safeguarding our planets. So this is a call for courage, courage to investigate, to test, and to learn. The Explorers Club has always been a home for those who push boundaries with purpose and integrity. And I hope that tonight will inspire each of us to support the researchers and visionaries who are working to expand the frontiers of what is possible. So again, thank you for being here and for your continued commitment to exploration, to science, and to the stewardship of our world.
I believe that great explorers and projects call for a grand poetic tribute. So I now present to you, Inside the Heart of the Doomsday Glacier, a poetic tribute to David Holland and the Seabed Curtain Project. There's a place on this earth where the ice mocks all mirth, where the cold and the currents converge, where the bergs boom and shatter, the blizzards all batter, the floes grind and growl and submerge, where the ice rolls and tumbles and thunders and rumbles, salt scattered and broken and wide. At the great glacier Thwaites, where our fate's at the gate, there's a ship on a treacherous ride. Mathematics professor, explorer, successor to Amundsen, Shackleton, Scott. David trawls on the ledge of Antarctica's edge to decipher the ice on this spot. 8 times he went south to the glacier's great mouth, past the point where the crushing waves crest. 8 times in the teeth of that desolate deep, on the Araon, through flow fields he's pressed. Through the ramming and slamming of swells in the sound, through the ridges that rear and collide, he casts out his sensors that feed his math tensors on top of the great groaning tide. For the sea seeps in stealth right under the shelf with warm winding waters so deep. From this gnawing and clawing, that glacier is calling to wake up the world from its sleep. Osaka, Shanghai, Jakarta, Mumbai, Miami, Bangkok on the brink. A meter of meltwater buries them all as cities and centuries sink. By probing the glacier, we learn what we must to deal with the darkest of fates. We learn how much time we all may have left, and if it's already too late. There's a project that dares to confront our nightmares. Could a curtain of certain grand scale block warm waters that creep to the base in the deep and arrest the great glacier's travail? a curtain of science, of bold self-reliance, a barrier to the warm flow. And David stands core to the team at the fore. If the math proves it out, we must go. Now, David disdains any public acclaim. It's the math and the science he serves. He probes the cold facts in the data he tracks, and models are what he observes. So raise up a glass to his mission so vast, an explorer of singular might. He'll return to the Thwaites, where our destiny waits, going back to the fight. Thank you. Now, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to the project lead, Marianne Hagen. Marianne is the former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Norway after holding the positions of Head of Communications for the Royal Court and Senior Advisor to the CEO of Norwegian Ship Owners Association. She also served on the executive management team of Norway's largest engineering company, Aker Solutions. Marianne.
Thank you so much, Leonard. What a gift you have here at the Explorers Club with Leonard in your midst. It is fantastic to be back here. It's starting to feel a little bit like home, I think. And I also want to say that we are so privileged to have the passion and the support of Leonard Levy and Fredrik Paulsen. As you know, these are serious times. I don't know about you folks, but sometimes I feel caught in between these parallel universes. One, that I hope and pray that things will soon return to normal. One, that I realize that things have changed in a fundamental way. The future is non-linear. The present is non-linear. And that means that the risks of today and tomorrow are not the same as the risk that we planned for yesterday. New, greater risks must be handled differently than the risks that follow incremental change that we are used to. The melting and the eventual collapse of Thwaites, the Doomsday Glacier, is a non-linear event. A global tipping point at risk at 1.5 degrees Celsius above in pre-industrial levels. And the rising sea levels are the most consequential consequence of climate change. So what do I mean when I say that? It's because the rising sea levels are the most damaging and costly. The saltwater intrusion to coasts and rivers, they destroys land and infrastructure. It threatens food security and freshwater supply for people and livestock. It will cause migrations in the hundreds of millions. It will cause death. It threatens the very existence of nations. And the cost of protection and repair in cities like New York stand in the way of developing the city. The Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Plan is $7 billion just for this area. And even more fundamentally, it threatens the financial stability by eroding real estate and property value. And why is that important? Because it challenges the bank security for loans. It makes insurance unavailable in affected areas. And this combination erodes wealth and values in the trillions. And how will this affect the values that we have planned to hand over to the next generation? This is the new non-linear assessment, risk assessment. And I know this was gloomy even for being a Friday 13th event. So the good thing is that there is hope. There is an idea that can address the root cause of the problem, the warm, salty bottom water that we now find on the Thwaites Glacier in West Antarctica. A man-made improvement of the natural sill in the canyon, leading the water from the deep ocean to the grounding line under the glacier. We believe it's doable. We believe it will have a positive global effect. We know it's not going to be easy. It's going to be extremely difficult, but that is not an excuse not to try. So now we are inviting you all to become a part of a collaboration or a collaborative effort to explore whether this idea of the seabed anchored curtain can be developed into a tool to relieve the symptoms of climate change for our children. So to further explore this very engaging topic, I want to hand the stage over to the brilliant executive editorial director for Fortune, Diane Brady. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm sure it'll turn on. Oh, it is turned on. So yes, hi everybody, I'm Diane Brady. And first I have to say thank you very much. We know who the main attraction is here today. It is David, but I want to first say thank you to the Explorers Club, because what I love about this place, it's the art of the possible. And so amid the existential angst, there's still exploration, there's scientific discovery. One thing I'll point out about Leonard, he's not just the poet laureate of the Explorers Club, he's also the poet laureate of business, because I believe you sent one of your poems to Ed Bastian of Delta, and you put it to music, and he sent it to all 103,000 of his employees. So you can actually Google that, and I highly recommend it, because there's a great body of work. My own personal goal is to have one of your poems someday. But let me tell you a little bit about tonight. We're going to obviously talk to David about what he is doing. It's very interactive. What I'd love to know first is who has been to Antarctica? Raise your hand. So anybody been engaged in polar research or just around this? So we've got, and there's a lot of interest around what we can do, which I think is fascinating. My own personal, why I'm here, I'm a business reporter, and I'll say, if you want the climate reporter, Eric Roston will raise his hand from Bloomberg over there. But I started my career at the UN Environment Program as a speechwriter, and I went to Antarctica in 1992 as a little kid. But the conversation back then was very different. It was about West, I think it was basically West Antarctica. There was a lot of enthusiasm around the Montreal Protocol with, and how all the countries would get together and address these problems. I think where we are today, the conversation has shifted to resilience, to climate math, to probable futures. Geoengineering is a very different topic. So I'm very excited to talk about, it's not either or, but what can we do to actually avert what we know is happening right now, the data that we're seeing. No better person than David Holland. Let me give you a little bit of background about him. He is a professor. I think of you as a premier glaciologist, because I love that term, but he's professor of mathematics and atmosphere, ocean science at the Courant Institute of Mathematical Science at NYU, director of environmental fluid dynamics laboratory in New York, former director of the Center for Sea Level Change. Happy to bring up David Holland. Dr. Holland, come on up. We're gonna stand to keep us all on our feet. So I think the first thing is I don't want to have my head block this. Give us a sense of why the Thwaites. For those of us who don't know, obviously we've talked a lot about global warming and what's happening just in general. Why is this so important?
Excellent question. Just returning from Antarctica, where our motto was, hurry up and Thwaites. Basically, you stand around.
I want 5 puns by the end of the night with Thwaites, yeah. Throttle the Thwaites.
So before I get to why Thwaites, I can just jump to the question you asked me earlier about why did I become interested in this. And if you walk through Central Park, you see these giant boulders that were not placed there by the Parks Department. They were left by the last glacier that was here and has been here most of the last several million years. The last time it left, it plowed out of some dirt, moraine, at the end of Long Island. So just jump with me without over-mathing it. Mariana brought up the word nonlinear. So just a little bit of math. If I said an equation is x, an unknown, equals 1, I don't know what x is, could be anything. That's a linear equation. It has only one solution. X equals 1. It's as simple as when you jump to x squared equals 1, then the world changes. That has two solutions, plus 1, minus 1. They're both valid solutions. There's no reason to pick one or the other, but one is, in our natural universe, you can only have one solution, and it's the climate we have now. Say x equals plus 1. So the equations of nature are nonlinear, and they jump. And part of the jump is mind-boggling, which is there's a solution to this equation called climate, and it's valid, right? You write an equation, and you get a solution, some technique. Some people say guess it. Well, it doesn't matter if you guess it or you use a technique. You figure out a solution. So we have at least two solutions to this climate. One is the one you're in now, and the other one is the Earth is completely frozen. So I think some people find it hard to believe that the Earth, top to bottom, has been frozen several times. A snowball, this white snowball in space, reflecting all the sunlight that's hitting it, with no way to get out of that solution. We call it tipping points when you jump between solutions. So it's not too much math, but I just want to get your idea that you're in a solution right now and they can jump. And that's a dramatic example. Where my wife and I live in Canada, there's a little piece of rock, and it's the oldest complex life form ever seen on Earth. It's 580 million years old. And unbelievably, you can walk right up to it. Nobody knows if it's a fish or a tree, but it's the first oldest example of complex life. That's really the moment the Earth came out of a snowball, the last time it was in one. And it jumped to this climate. So that's remarkable about how delicate our climate is. We are this third object from our sun. We are perfectly positioned where this material called water can be frozen or not frozen. We get our neighbor to one side, Venus, is 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, a little hot, filled with CO2. Mars on the other side, not so good. We are Goldilocks, right in our orbit, distance from the sun. But we are on a knife's edge with our climate. It's so easy to perturb it. So that, I just want to put that context.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And look, there's obviously life is about choices, and there's many elements we talk about with climate change. Let's take us to the Doomsday Glacier. What makes this particular glacier the one that we should focus on right now?
Okay, so a very short history. At the end of World War II, there was a student in New York City, Charlie Bentley, and his supervisor sent him to Antarctica, and he went there for 2 years, International Geophysical Year. And when he went to this place called West Antarctica, they had, the pictures are amazing, they were on tractors, most things were in a crevasse, but anyway, they lived. And he did this sounding with seismic. He made an explosion, and it went from the surface of the glacier. So he's out now on this glacier, Thwaites Glacier, far away from anywhere with a few other people. And the sound bounces back, and it says, West Antarctica is a mile below sea level. The floor that the glacier's on is a mile below sea level. And he said, that's wrong. And he communicated back, and everyone said, you don't know how to do anything right, Charlie, so why don't you just try that again? And he did it again. And so that was the discovery that the thing called West Antarctica is actually on a floor that is well below sea level, and that's point number one. So does that make sense that this glacier, so picture Antarctica is about the size of the US, so picture that, but picture the Gulf of Mexico, for example, is also covered by a glacier, but that'll be the West Antarctic analog. But it's in the ocean. That's point number one. It's very critical. The ocean can attack glaciers and bring them down quickly. The atmosphere, not so much. So is that part making sense? So why Thwaites? Well, it's because this is the front of Thwaites, at the coastline, if you will, of Antarctica. And if you go back maybe 500 miles, 1,000 miles, South Pole. So the seafloor there is below sea level. There's a floor. And as you go back towards South Pole, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper until you run into the South Pole and the Transantarctic Mountains. So you have this massive bowl of ice that's in the Pacific Ocean, and it's in contact with the ocean. That set the stage for this problem. Then, a decade later, a mathematician in the US wrote a little paper, 5 pages, and he said, if the seafloor of a glacier at the coast is so deep, but if it gets deeper inland, it's called unstable. So you can have mathematical equations where you have solutions, but what happens is the solution runs away. So the example would be a ball on a hill. I can write an equation for a ball on a hill. If I touch it, it's unstable. Little perturbation will go down the hill. A ball in a valley is stable. You perturb it, it returns. When I look at this, I see this as an equation and one that is unstable. That's what this guy wrote, and he figured it out. And the world didn't pay much attention. A decade later, another glaciologist put together the idea. This is the late 70s. He said, wait now, somebody said this glacier in Antarctica is unstable, and the world is warming. That's when global warming was first introduced, very late 70s. And he said, this could be a bad scenario for the world. And it passed. So you're getting up to the 1980s now, and the world is saying, some of us know there's a situation in the southern hemisphere. So far, so good?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that we hear a lot when, let's say, doomsday. Where are we at this point? If this breaks off, you hear things about like 2 feet raising sea level. Then there's the 10 feet scenario. Give us a sense of where we are today. I know you just came back. We'll talk about the seabed curtain project, but how urgent is it? Marianne alluded to it a little bit, as did Leonard. How much time do we have in your mind as a scientist before we have to be addressing, some of the probable futures of this glacier and what the impact will be if it does break off and accelerate melting?
Okay, so we'll get to time frames, and that's a question I'm always asked, and we phrase it as how much, how fast? So how much ice will come off? You mentioned some numbers, and how fast? That's an obvious question. The short answer to that is the equation of that glacier has not yet been written, and the answer to that is because we don't have the data, hence we were in Antarctica. So that's pretty straightforward.
Just weeks ago, and we'll talk about that, yeah.
And so I said it was unstable, and so that's all mathematical and theoretical. But then you say, are you just crying wolf because you just said could be a disaster? So maybe crying wolf. Maybe people are upset you don't cry wolf and something happens. Mm-hmm. So in the late 80s, we were in this precarious thing. And then NASA put up satellites. And this gets really interesting. You all know satellites went up around 1977. And they collected data. And over 20 years, what did they see? They saw the biggest change on Earth happens at the Thwaites Glacier. The elevation of Thwaites is dropping by tens of feet every year. Vast area of the Earth is just dropping. Why is it lowering? So that caught everyone's attention. It's like, wait now, didn't somebody say this is unstable? And why is this sticking out on the planet as the largest change? As I mentioned, I did computer modeling, and in my computer models, before observing, I was just writing math equations. And one day, I put warm water in my model. A model is virtual, right? You could do anything. You just add more water. And boom, the glacier went and melted like crazy. And it was completely non-linear. It was a small change, but the reaction.
A tipping point.
And it was huge.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. And then it occurred to me that maybe what's going on is warm water is going under these glaciers. And I don't think that part's so obvious. You think of global warming, and you think the air is warming, which is correct, and then you say the glacier's melting. But do the maths, it's not going to melt it. It takes 1,000 years, it'll eventually wipe it out. The amazing thing is in a computer model, you can see things that happen, and do they reflect nature? Well, as a small tangent, I've never really understood. We have the natural universe and we have math, and neither one needs the other one. Math could exist without a universe, but yet math describes largely our universe, which is, to me, just remarkable. And so if you understand it, you just write an equation and you take out your phone, you see the weather forecast tomorrow. That's just simply a mathematical equation that is solved. And so as we go through that process, just get a bit of water here. Mm-hmm. So that computer model I was just playing with said, if you put warm water under a glacier, it goes absolutely crazy. That's when Denise and I actually went to Greenland to check out this idea of warm water. Is that what happened in Greenland? And turned out that was it. That's what happened. And so immediately you jump to Thwaites, which is the elephant of the thing, and it must be warm water. So that's why we went there, to find whether or not warm water had gone under it. And we did find that, which is perhaps not surprising, but you don't want to guess it. You want to actually check it out. Is that really what happened? And the answer is yes.
And you've got, so I know we've got some video. I want to talk about the research that's just taken place, but give us a top line, sort of quick sense of what it is that this seabed anchored curtain's going to do, because it sounds fantastical in a way. It's so massive. How did you come to this being one of the possible ways to buy us time, so to speak?
Okay. So the background to that is, so I'm studying the glacier for years and years, and a guy, John Moore, had this idea that you could block warm water, well, the warm water that's going under it. And if you think about it, it's a very special, the 3D model outside might be most helpful. It's just basically the Grand Canyon, if you've ever been there. In the seafloor between the Pacific Ocean and Antarctica is a continental shelf. And in that seafloor is cut a canyon from the glacier going back and forth. And the warm water that's coming, ultimately from the Gulf Stream, the conveyor belt, and you know about how water moves around the planet, makes its way to Antarctica. It's warm, but it's salty, and that makes it heavy. So it travels along the seafloor of the shelf, and obviously it's going to go down in the canyon because that's deeper. But across the canyon, the glacier, over millions of years, going back and forth, left moraines, like Long Island, across the canyon, these bumps. And the warm water has to get over the bump to get from the Pacific Ocean to Antarctica. It has to cross the shelf. So the idea then is, well, make the bump bigger, and you could stop the warm water. So again, I want you to visualize the surface of Antarctica is cold and fresh, but as you go deeper, it becomes the warm salt water, ultimately from the Gulf Stream.
So you're creating a seawall of sorts, basically.
Yeah, to be determined what, but the idea is you could block it, no different than you could take the Verrazano Bridge and block across New York Harbor. You wouldn't want to do it, but certainly you would stop the circulation of water. And what's interesting is it's such a small area, it's so manageable, it's not the scale of the planet.
So give us a sense of the scale. It's how long, how big?
Yeah, so it's in width, it would be about 50 miles. So scale that, as if you're familiar. And in height, the mound is several hundreds of feet, and you would just have to add a few more hundreds of feet. It's something, when you think of other structures that have been built around the Earth, you think of Venice, floodgates, you think of the Red Sea and Mediterranean, other structures. It's a pretty small structure on the face of the Earth that we're going to talk about and ask questions about, would you want to do it? Well, we're not saying let's do it, we're saying let's research it. And the research might show that you stop this warm water. You block it, right? It's Grand Canyon with, if you visualize warm salty water traveling on the bottom, Could you block it? Well, yeah, you could block it. You can engineer things. You could do that. And we want to research that. But the profoundness of it is, which I find shocking, is for such a small area, then you protect the coastline of the entire planet, which is a lot of coastline. And as Marianne was saying, do you want to protect every coastline? I don't think you can actually do that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I know we've got a tape, because obviously people like to visually see in terms of the research that's just been done. But I think one of the things with regard to how much, do you have an estimate, this particular scenario that you've painted with regard to how long it is, how big it is, how much time does it buy us potentially? I mean, how is it, it's what, $80 billion? I'm not even sure what the budget would be and how much to maintain. Why is it now a really viable part of the conversation that we should be looking at this, researching it, and potentially mobilizing forces to implement it?
Yeah, it's a different experience for me just coming back and having physically seen it. It's like you're here in New York, you experienced it, you know about it. If you're describing New York City to someone, it's slightly different. What really struck me is that how small this part of the planet is and how doable it is to possibly modify it for the sake of stopping this glacier from there to the South Pole, going into the ocean. You think about it, that's a lot of ice. It would add 2 feet to everywhere on the planet. 2 feet of ocean. That's a fair amount.
Just if this is if the glacier alone, if the Thwaites itself,
right,
that would be 2 feet. What's the 10 feet scenario?
Then its neighbors left and right would be invaded by oceans. On one side is Weddell Sea, the other Ross Sea, and they would undoubtedly go into the ocean, and then you have 10 feet. But the same scenario could eventually unfold on the other side of the continent, East Antarctica, and then that's another 30 feet. So the world needs to think, and these are all done in little fjords, so you can.
So,
what's that?
and I think So what will the curtain be made out of? And then after that, let's talk about the research you've just done, because you're fresh from. It's like we're weeks after we've just had this important. So what is the curtain made of? And give us a sense as to how stable it is. There's obviously lots of questions people will have about ecosystems and such as well. But
yeah,
tell us about
question.
that.
So my first reaction was just dump a lot of rock on top of it.
Well, that's one way to do it.
That's one way to do it. So wouldn't completely rule that out. There's a lot of rock on the seafloor, and you could move it. We'll quickly jump to the effects. This would have a negative effect on that environment. And flooding the entire coastline of the world would have like 1,000 times worse effect. So pick your bad outcome. There's no way out of this. There is no perfect solution.
But is the curtain like a thicker version of my shower curtain? And it's like,
Well,
yay? What is it that's, give us a sense of, because I'm sure it's much more sophisticated than what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ideas. If you look at the whole story of how Venice finally decided to protect itself with floodgates and all that, I think that's the research part, is what is the answer? And I think a lot of smart people can figure that out. And it might be ideas we have not even yet conceived. And one of the things is you want to, first of all, build virtual curtains. And in those, you can find out, well, how big does it need to be? Again, you build a computer model of it, which is nothing other than a weather model, advanced, more capability. You can put in virtual currents till the cows come home and try lots of things. So using your mind to figure out how this works is not a great idea. Like, you try to think it through and what's going to happen. You use math and observations, and you let that model tell you, just like a weather model.
What's the debate right now, before we go, and I do want to go to the first video, because I think that visually also takes us to Antarctica. What is the thinking right now around what this curtain would be made of, and a little bit, just give us a sense of why it should be part of the discussion and why it's feasible. You've told us about why it's feasible from a size point of view. From a physics point of view, what is it made of? How is it anchored? Anything like that?
I would say unknown. There are ideas, smart engineering, and it could be a surprising thing. It could be just a mesh. It could be something that floats. Obviously, it's something that you put in, you want to be able to remove if it goes awry or has a negative impact. Now, personally, I do get the sensitivity to the ecosystem in that. However, I'd have to say I really don't sense that it's going to be that much of an ecosystem change. There are mountains and sills all over the place down there, and adding a bit of height to one of them will have, I will do virtual models, I would think very little. Could be wrong, but just intuition. It's like, I think the fish are going to just swim over it.
So I feel it's a good time to roll the tape. So what tape are we about to see here? What is it that you're going to show us?
So those of you who commute and go through the back and forth around New York City, this is how you commute in Antarctica on a ship. We had a camp about 30 kilometers, say 15 miles inland of this front. This is the terminus. This is where the glacier meets the ocean. And that part calves off, makes icebergs. And the seafloor is down there, but 30 kilometers, 15 miles in, the seafloor runs into grounded ice. So that if you're familiar with the beach, like you go to New Jersey Shore, you go to the beach in Antarctica is 15 miles inland of that, and it's down about a half a mile. And that's the beach. That's where the ocean stops. It's called the grounding line. It's where the ice is grounded. And that's the most critical place. That's where the instability was identified. Grounding lines, that floating point where ice starts to float off the continent, is unstable. And so the camp was put to get the water at the grounding line to see is warm water in there. A very small point to make, but very important, one that shocked me, and then we'll come back to the video, but just completely in a different direction. I was shocked. Again, I have great faith in mathematical models because I think the weather forecast works really well. There's a reason it's wrong every now and then, you realize, called chaos theory, and it's with imperfect observations. It's impossible to solve a nonlinear equation, which has multiple solutions. What you get on your phone is the average of all the possible solutions, and the average is generally right.
Right.
Same with
we
this.
have black swans and such.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. So what's fascinating is if you take a weather model of the Earth and you run it for 100 years, back 100 years, and you put no change in carbon dioxide, nothing happens to Thwaites. Now, in a way, it kind of makes sense. It's been there since the last ice age ended 20,000 years ago. If warm water is under it now and it's melting like crazy, well, clearly that could not have been happening for a long time. Otherwise, it would not be there. So something changed.
So it's a testament to global warming.
It is. And
but you were just, what was this research trip you just did? You were measuring it, basically.
yeah, to see that the warm water was there.
I'm dying to see this tape. I don't want to overact, but what is it that, give us, what are we about to see? So are we just seeing?
Traveling to that grounding line.
Okay.
And just to finish that point, if in that virtual model you add carbon dioxide, as we are adding, right? It's a digital twin, it's a virtual model. All of a sudden, the winds over the tropical Pacific change. And those winds travel down to Antarctica, and they push the water on the surface of Thwaites, that water right there. They push that water out to the Southern Ocean, into the Pacific, and then the warm water comes underneath it. It's a remarkably bizarre, complex connection that we drive automobiles, make CO2, and warm water goes under this glacier, which is the most vulnerable glacier on Earth. So it's kind of super weird. You have the most vulnerable glacier, and it is the place in Antarctica, the one place that climate change puts warm water under it. That's, and you can do the model, and it's there. If you try to think it through your mind, not going to happen. It's too many pieces of physics going on. So that little part I want to stress, which I found hard to believe, because sometimes I feel people just want to say climate change is connected to everything and they never prove it, they just say it. It's like, well, maybe yes, maybe no. This is truly—
We're all scientists and explorers here. We want the proof.
Yeah, and so it's truly, in my mind, unbelievable that we see this effect in the model. So then we say, okay, so let's go there, back to the commuting.
Let's go.
So this is how you get from the icebreaker to the camp. You get a helicopter first. That's the face of the Thwaites Glacier. Now, Thwaites is broken up massively into these canyons, and pilots are pretty good at not hitting things. So this glacier is completely fractured. it's ripping itself apart. It's going so fast.
Are we seeing visible evidence of climate change right now as we're looking at this?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
glacier. So then, after you get past all the broken parts, then you get up onto where it's less broken, and the camp is in the background. You see all these crevasses that were there? This thing is filled with crevasses. You make one wrong step, you will be your last step. And that's our camp, and that's where we put a drill through the glacier, about a half mile down. And that under that camp is the grounding line. From there inland is to the South Pole. It's all grounded. And from the camp onward, it's all floating. So it's, again, the magic place.
So what are you measuring right now? This is sort of, in a way, it's to kind of create a baseline. Is it to measure the actual degree to which climate change is having an impact on the glacier? Or tell us a bit about, because there's lots of research done every year in Antarctica. What's significant about this one?
Well, this spot here is the most critical spot, I would say, on Earth for sea level change. And again, it's hard to believe it's all so small. And when I was with the New York Times reporter, I kept telling him, and she finally wrote in the last piece, I was trying to explain to him that what a small planet we have and how small this is. So this, when you're not there, it's like it's an abstraction, although this video helps. But this is now a piece of my neighborhood. Like, I know this thing intimately now about what it looks like. And so what I'm struck by is that, again, how small it is, that the Earth is obviously not infinite, but this is just incredibly small. And when you're there, it totally transforms your life. People can say that, but it does. And the PBS guys were there. When they first came up to it, they were kind of surprising. The ship pulled up after many delays. They were actually crying. It was remarkable to see this part of the Earth and to see how delicate it is, and to think it could go in the snap of a finger. And so what was your...
Well, I think part of it is, what is it that you've gleaned from, it's hard to think, but what have you learned from this exercise? I mean, a couple of weeks ago, you've come back. Some of you may have read the New York Times. I know PBS did a piece. What have we learned that has either reinforced or changed your view around what needs to be done next? And then we'll go to some questions from the audience, too.
I think mostly what changed for me is to look at the way we do science. And a lot of what we did here, I would say, failed. And for example, we drilled a hole and then put the instrument down, and then 3/4 of the way down, it froze in. And it piled on top of itself all these cables and instruments. And it's frozen in this hole 3/4 of the way down that ice shelf, and it's sitting there, sadly. And what you learn is that humanity, this is the best effort we have at dealing with this problem. So it's very humbling. People think we just go out and solve.
Is it a failure, or is it just a glitch?
It's
the fact that it's
yeah, so that
frozen?
was interesting. The people, that was an interesting, heated moment. When we landed on the glacier, I had gone away, and I commuted back. You just saw me commuting. And they were in denial, the other teams, saying we didn't fail, because we have, right, it's half full, half that. No, in my view, it failed. But through that, it completely transformed my view of how to do this science, and this is not how to do it. There's another way to do it, which is much better. You don't need to drill to that ice. You can just send robots underneath. And that's a capability the world has.
Are we going to do that?
That's what I want to start, and with other nations. There's only a handful of nations that work in Antarctica: South Korea, USA, UK, Australia, Germany, a few others. And Russia, and China. So what I learned, and it's difficult to express it, but I'll just say it. What I learned is that this is a solvable problem. It sounds too remote to you if you're watching and looking at it. Is, what are you talking about? What glacier? Antarctica is big, it's far away. What can we do about it? I've already stressed, in talking earlier, that this thing is unstable. And the last interglacial, this thing was in the ocean. It was gone. Sea level was higher. It's there now. It's on a truly knife's edge. And so as I was sailing around there for 2 months, it really occurred to me that if humans want to, they can really intervene here and block this. May not solve it forever, because planet's warming and warming, but it would certainly buy time, decades and decades. So it's something the world might want to think about.
So if I'm going to go to the audience, and I'll come to you, raise your hands. But before I do that, let me ask one other question. With the Seabed Curtain Project right now, obviously you just mentioned a lot of different countries that are not necessarily talking to each other at the moment. There's that. Do we need political buy-in in addition to capital? I mean, give me a sense as to, there's the science part of the equation, and then there's the execution part of getting it done. Do you sense, since you've been at this for many years, the conversation has changed? Is there momentum around this is one area where we can get people together to try and do something?
Totally. And conversations really don't change in a year. They really change on the scale of a decade. And if you go back to the 70s, there was a certain thing about climate. In the 80s, it got in the radar. And the 90s, then all of a sudden, the Arctic Ocean, the sea ice started to disappear. And people were like, but how? Why? And now it's half gone. So that's a major transformation of our planet. Really big changes happen, and this one's on the edge. But in terms of getting it done with different nations, I think it's a mixture portfolio. Different countries have different ways of doing science. No single country can solve this problem. This is that. But as a consortium of 6 nations, I think this could be done. And but first, we want to emphasize we want to do it in a computer. We want to do it virtually. We want to check it out.
The digital twin.
Yeah, the digital twin, and then report back and say, we can't do it, we can do it, and all that. So what I was most struck by is that this is doable. I am saying it, and I don't know that you can understand it, but you'd have to be there to say, yeah, this is what we're talking about, this thing outside the ship window. That's the glacier, and at that moment, it finally comes apart that, yeah, we could do this.
Well, and I know you have other images and such, but I want to make sure if anybody has questions that we can also engage, because I feel like we're in an audience here of people who are explorers themselves, who are curious about this. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and then you have a question, and just tell us a little bit about who you are.
Okay, well, no, I'm just a resident, live on the water, sea changes. But you talk about warm water, and I'm wondering if you find a critical point of the warmth of the water.
Yeah, so it's kind of, the water underneath glaciers is at the freezing point, typically. And when you add salt to water, it drops the freezing point from a few degrees. And then when you add the pressure of the ice, it also changes the freezing point. So typically, it's at its freezing point. And all we're talking about here is about 8 degrees Fahrenheit above that. So 1 degree has a little effect, 2 degrees has a nonlinear effect. By the time you get to 8, it's kind of starting to get exponential. And so there's no point, it's just that when you have this much warmth, the glacier is melting right there now, several hundred feet per year, that's dropping. So it's on fire.
Do we have the time? I mean, when we talk about climate change, just in terms of where we are with regard to passing the 1 degree, the 2 degree point, how much time do we have, given the research that you've done so far and the instability of this glacier, before we have to really address it in a way that a point of no return?
Right. So I'd love to answer that question, and the answer is I don't have the equation of that, and so that question cannot be answered. All we can say is it's gone before, it's unstable. There's these smoking gun things, a handful of things I discussed earlier about why you should be concerned about this. The warm water's under it, satellites show it's dropping, it's in a bowl, it's unstable, and it's really big. So all of that only leads you to the possibility of saying, yes, it could happen, and it looks like it's happening. But to me, that's insufficient. That is not a statement like a weather forecast, the weather tomorrow. So we don't have it, hence we're out there. So can't be answered.
We have a question here.
Hi, my name is Lucas Charnetsky. I'm going to ski solo to the South Pole this November and December. And I'm wondering, trying to, yeah. I'm wondering, you mentioned that what matters is the kind of scale of a decade. And I'm curious, how much pressure you put on or how much importance you put on the kind of media coverage that you get about this now to sway public opinion. And then a second kind of smaller question is, what other ideas did you explore before arriving at a curtain? Presumably not the first idea.
No, so let's go backwards. First start with what are other ideas, and then let's talk about the decadal change in the way people see the world. The other ideas were people would always, after I mentioned earlier, I give seminars on this, and I would go for 40 minutes and really lay it on the line and say, this is the case. Now, if you have something to tell me that this is not the case, that's what I want to hear. And nobody has ever said anything sensible to say that this is not the case, what I've told you.
What are some of the wilder ideas that were considered and tossed aside?
Well, the other ideas tend to be more global, which is, for instance, one is to block sunlight from the sun, bring the temperature down, and all these other ideas. So there's a lot of ideas, and I won't go through them now, but the problem with the other ideas, just like, for example, take one example, carbon mitigation. So in this room right now, I'm breathing carbon dioxide that's 50% more than it was 100 years ago. And that's the issue, right? There's just more CO2 in this air. So you could remove the CO2. And so we seem to be struggling with that idea. Before I get to answer your question, what other, I'm just going to go way off to other ideas. And so like last year, was it in Iceland? A plant is built that puts CO2 in rocks. So they're removing CO2. And the problem is that it's about removing about as much CO2 as in this neighborhood. It's off in scale by at least 1 million. And you're going to build 1 million carbon dioxide plants? No, you can't. So some ideas just don't scale. Money aside, you just, there's too many zeros to get there. Like US budget is what, 7 trillion? So if it costs, 3 times the US budget to build something, probably not going to happen. I mean, you could do it, but it's not going to happen. So many ideas fail on the engineering, they fail on the money, they fail on the practicality. This idea, so far, and we're all interested to listen, this idea of the curtain seems to hit all the points, the doable, et cetera, in the case we've made. So that's why I'm interested in this. I'm not trying to sell this. I'd be the first one to jump off this ship. If there's a reason to jump off, move on, do something more important. But I haven't seen an idea that approaches the impact and plausibility, doability of this one.
Hi there, my name is Angelique Ulstrom. I'm one of the board of directors for the Antarctic and Southern Ocean Coalition, and I have 2 questions. One is, how would you go about approaching the research and modeling for some of the ecological impacts of this project, namely altered water flow, benthic ecosystems, noise pollution, altered water chemistry on the marine life, such as krill and all the species that depend on them, like the blue whales? And the second question I have is, how do you avoid setting a precedence in this region for large-scale geoengineering projects without sufficient governance, as the Antarctic Treaty System operates on a consensus-based model, and it would be very highly unlikely to get all 25 or so parties to agree to this? Thank you.
Exactly. So governance and then fish. The governance issue.
Governance and fish. I mean, what else is there in life, really? I think we've summed it up.
So
go there and then
the governance issue is perhaps putting the cart in front of the horse. The horse is the main thing here. And that is this doable or not? All we want to do is a very clear statement. We want a few years to build a blueprint. A blueprint is not a building. It's not a structure. The blueprint will say whether or not this works. And I'm pretty confident we can figure that out in terms of building models, collecting data. The models can also include the fish component. So as you know, in computer models, you have biological packages able to describe what are called nutrients, phytoplankton, zooplankton, detritus, and you can model what happens to that carbon uptake. So that will be eventually a part of the model. It will be, Southern Ocean is the biggest sink of carbon dioxide, right? Carbon dioxide goes in the ocean. As you warm the ocean, carbon dioxide comes out. Separate story is CO2 is coming back out of that ocean, and there's lots of drama associated with CO2 in the ocean. Back to this, I think we can get a sense of what's going to happen in terms of a virtual reality, a digital twin of this. And it does jump also to, well, don't do this, that's fine, hands off. Let the global coastline flood. Now you have an immeasurable amount of ecosystem damage.
Sounds like there's flexibility, though, too, when you talk about mesh material and such that I think it is a legitimate question. Of course, everybody always cares about what's the impact of the ecosystem, krill, et cetera. Modeling is one way, and what happens, in fact, like your drill gets stuck, can be unanticipated. So do you think is that how big a obstacle is that, since there are a lot of people who also don't want us to be looking for quick fixes to wicked problems we have to address on a bigger level?
Well, I would go back to the fact that we're not actually building a curtain, and we have no intention of building a curtain. We have an intention of answering a question. Can you build a curtain? What would it be made of, and what would be its impacts?
So the feasibility of it.
The feasibility, and to leave that with other people who can figure out, because then you jump to governance and you say, are we going to do it? Well, that's for other people to figure out. We don't have to do everything, but we have the capability of answering the question, can the world do this, and would it work? So that is our attempt at contributing.
And it may shift, of course, as climate.
And
So
one
let
of
me
the things is about the decadal thing, as we were talking about earlier. In 10 years from now, this conversation will be completely different. This is happening no matter what you think. Climate interventions, in 1,000 years, this planet will be an intervened planet. I guarantee it. Just like your house is a smart house and a thermostat, this planet will be transformed by technology. Right now, it's the first we're hearing of it, and it's in the media, it's capturing people's attention. It's going to be a complex time coming forward. Science is going to do its best over hundreds of years to make this planet livable, hopefully. What we're doing now is completely unsustainable, reckless.
Right.
So change is coming, and in a decade, even this conversation will look different. This will be on the table seriously, just like the UN was against it, and they were for it, and they were against it. It's wobbling, and people are recognizing we need other tools, right? Adaptation, mitigation.
Yeah.
We need other tools, so let's investigate them. Other people are saying, don't research it. I don't get that.
So we have I see we've got a lot of different questions here. So I'm going to ask everybody to ask one question instead of two, if that's okay. So pick your best question.
Thank you. Lindsay Howard, Senior Foreign Policy Analyst at Bloomberg. Thank you for these extraordinary insights. The late, great founder and leader of Singapore, at the end of his life, was asked, what has surprised you most in your lifetime? And he said that the world's leaders didn't come forward to work together for climate change. Here you are with some solutions. My young son is a senior at Skidmore working on psychology and the anxiety that this